The Hitox Laboratory is the only place in Switzerland that prepares and studies minute quantities of chemical warfare agents. One of its aims is to gather and safeguard knowledge of chemical weapons, which means that the threat they pose can be assessed and the relevant protection measures can be determined. A further aim is to contribute to peacekeeping and international cooperation. The gas attacks perpetrated during World War I were the first ever example of the large-scale use of chemical weapons. German and French artillery grenades were loaded with mustard gas. 125,000 tons of chemical warfare agents were responsible for almost 100,000 deaths. In view of this threat, the Swiss Federal Council decided to act. In 1925, it set up the Wemyss Laboratory, now known as the Spiez Laboratory. The Hitox Laboratory is part of the Spiez Laboratory, the Swiss Institute for NBC Protection. One of its aims is to assess as accurately as possible the potential threat to Switzerland from NBC weapons and terrorist attacks involving weapons of mass destruction. Work in the Hitox Laboratory is governed by the strictest safety measures. All procedures involving highly toxic substances are conducted in what is known as a glove box. If toxic chemicals are manipulated outside the glove box, the protective suits must be worn. Any work with toxic substances must be monitored by a second scientist. For safety reasons, the Hitox Laboratory is kept under low air pressure. Spent air passes a filtering unit before leaving the building. In case of emergency, the laboratory is equipped with an airlock which houses showers for decontamination. It also has a standby unit to provide additional support. The laboratory adheres strictly to the regulations on decontamination and the specialized disposal of waste products. Wastewater is collected in a large tank for environmentally compatible disposal. The use of Taboon against Kurdish rebels during the Iran-Iraq War was a tragic reminder of the devastating damage that highly toxic chemical weapons can cause. Let us also not forget the terrorist attack using sarin, a nerve agent in the subway system of the Japanese capital, Tokyo. In fact, since 1997, when the Chemical Weapons Convention entered into force, the use of chemical weapons has been outlawed. However, many countries have not yet signed the treaty. The Hitox Laboratory wants to make a significant contribution to international security. The handling of chemicals is kept to a strict minimum. This is why the plant is controlled by a semi-automatic system. The aim is to synthesize toxic substances of the highest possible purity. The laboratory uses state-of-the-art equipment, such as a gas chromatograph with a mass spectrometer, to test reaction and purity. A tiny quantity of each highly toxic chemical is stored under the tightest security in the Hitox Laboratory. All synthesized chemicals are entered in a database. This means that reference samples can be sourced quickly. The Hitox Laboratory has many different clients. It prepares reference substances for the International Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons and lets it share in its know-how. The Spiez Laboratory is an OPCW designated laboratory. The Hitox Laboratory is periodically inspected by experts from the OPCW. Another client is the Spiez Laboratory itself. It requires samples of toxic substances to test the resistance of protective materials, for example. The Swiss Army is another client. The Spiez Laboratory assists with training courses for military NBC specialists, which allows an effective transfer of our expert knowledge. Employees of the HyTox laboratory are also involved abroad. In Albania, for example, experts from the laboratory oversaw the disposal of toxic chemicals. Missions of this kind require specialist knowledge and experience in handling toxic substances. Experts from the Spiez laboratory are in great demand throughout the world. The activities of the HyTox laboratory are varied and demand the highest safety precautions. It shares the same aims as the Spiez laboratory itself, securing peace and a world without weapons of mass destruction.